This is an Innova destroyer. This is also an Innova destroyer. This DD3 has the same flight numbers as a destroyer, but so does this Odin from Viking Discs. So why do they fly so different? Because flight numbers don't matter. Hey everyone, it's Greg from Six Sided Discs. At our pop-up shops, people often ask me, what do you have with the same numbers as a destroyer? And I show them a stack of discs. But then they might also ask, what do you have that flies like a destroyer? And I might show them a completely different stack of discs. There are tons of options for players to choose from when it comes to picking a disc for a specific slot in their bag. So how do you decide which one to pick? Honestly, you don't know a disc until you throw it. So we're going to throw some to find out. But first, it's important to remember that the flight of a disc is impacted by a ton of different things. Whether it's plastic, weight, how flat or domey the disc is, the specific run of that disc, arm speed, elevation, humidity, temperature, release angle, wind speed, wind direction, nose angle, spin, the list goes on. We'll tell you a little bit about the conditions that we were throwing these discs in to test them, so keep that in mind as we explore the destroyers. Firstly, this is Max. He's a 983 rated amateur player from our area, and he's also a member of the Disc Golf Club at Ohio State. He's going to be our test subject for these destroyers and destroyer clones. Max has 5 or 6 different destroyers in his bag currently that we're going to use for testing purposes in this video and see how they compare with other stock discs that are currently on the market. Now, the way that Max has so many different destroyers in different levels of wear is because he's taken the time to go out and throw these discs hundreds, if not thousands of times. But not all of us have that luxury, especially if you're an amateur player with a full-time job and you're just looking to get out and be able to enjoy the discs that you have. We're going to compare some brand new stock discs to the ones that Max is throwing and see which ones we can find that line up most closely with the stability of his destroyers. The discs we've selected for testing are based on 2 criteria. Either they have the same flight numbers as the destroyer, 12, 5, -13, or they are rumored to fly the same based on descriptions from other players and people online. Let's kick things off with the most overstable slot. First up, we have a new 2022 Calvin Heimburg Halo Star Destroyer. Max is throwing this in a tailwind, and as you can see, we get a huge amount of glide left, but not much distance. You can compare this to the C-Line DD3 from Discmania, which has a little bit less movement to the left, but it gets a lot of ground play. It also definitely had less glide than the Halo Destroyer. In a headwind, the C-Line DD3 is plenty overstable to fight the wind. But the Halo Destroyer does penetrate further, getting more distance while maintaining that stability. Next, for our slightly less overstable discs, we have a seasoned 2021 Calvin Heimburg Halo Star Destroyer. And in a headwind, it gets a bit of turn before it fights back and fades left. In a tailwind, it stands up to flat for just a moment before fading left. And you can see a pretty clear similarity between the Orbit Grace's flight path and that of that more seasoned Halo Star Destroyer. I'd say if you're looking for a seasoned destroyer but you don't have time to beat one in, if you grab a max weight Orbit Grace and give that a try, it may fit that slot perfectly. Moving down in stability again, we have an Innova Paul Macbeth 4-time Star Destroyer. Again, beat in to lose some of its original overstability, and in a headwind, it can't keep up with those Halo Destroyers, easily turning over to the right. We found a very similar flight from the stock Latitude 64 Grace. While the Orbit Grace had a lot of fight in a headwind, or left movement in a tailwind, the stock Grace simply didn't have that. You should see similar flight paths from both of these discs in a tailwind. Alright, now for the distance bombers. Let's start with Max's first truly understable destroyer, an Avery Jenkins 3-time world champion edition. This one is quite beat in. In a headwind, it definitely gets turned over, but still manages a slight forward finish to be one of the furthest flying discs that we tested. Comparing against this specific destroyer, we have the Castaplast K1 Grim X. This is a stock disc from late 2022, and while it had a little less forward push, it did have a similar flight path to the previous destroyer. In a tailwind, both discs again had similar flight paths, standing up for a slight turn before fading out. Finally, the really flippy ones. First, Max's really flippy, old, beat-up destroyer. So old, he had to Sharpie the stamp back on. On Slide Heiser in a tailwind, it still gets a big turn before finishing straight. The disc that closest resembles the flight of the most understable destroyer was probably the Dynamic Disc's Trespass, though unfortunately we did lose the footage of that disc out in the field. You can imagine though that it flew quite a lot like this very flippy destroyer in the headwind, though in reality it was actually quite a bit more understable. I am happy to introduce the most understable disc that we tested with the same flight numbers as a destroyer, the Viking Odin. In a tailwind, this disc flipped over almost immediately and frankly ran out of fairway to fly on. While in a headwind, I'll let our reactions tell the story. Bye.
Oh, okay.
Look, it's a roller. It's a bomb roller, almost. Isn't that crazy?
I think
This disc blew my mind, and as somebody whose arm speed isn't getting any faster at the age of 35, it went straight into my bag, because that's exactly what I wanted, is a destroyer that might actually turn for my arm. And I have to say, so far it's been a little bit inconsistent. Sometimes it turns for me, sometimes it doesn't. After all the testing that we did, here's a few things that we could conclude. By far, the most understable discs that we tested were the Viking Odin and the Dynamic Discs Trespass. Each turned over way more than we were expecting. In headwinds, they were almost unthrowable. Next, we found that a lot of the discs that MVP manufactures, like the Axiom Defy, the ThoughtSpace Synapse, the Photon from MVP, as well as the Mint Goat, were all quite flat and all really struggled to get much glide, but they were all really overstable. This isn't to say that they aren't good discs. They might do better for forehands or in headwinds, or maybe in lighter weights they could perform better, but in our testing, they were just super overstable. Keep in mind though, our sample size was relatively low. We tested about 25 to 30 discs total, and not very many multiples of individual molds. We just want to make sure that we're not judging these discs too harshly. We also learned that some of the discs that most closely resembled a sort of stereotypical destroyer's flight were the DD3 from Discmania, which makes sense because it used to be produced by Innova. The C-Line DD3 was a great complement or sort of like-for-like version of a really overstable destroyer, while the S-Line DD3 made for a more workable distance destroyer. And again, these were made by Innova in the past, now manufactured by Discmania, and they just really feel very similar to a destroyer. And we also found that the Latitude 64 Grace definitely fit the bill as a realistic destroyer substitute. Now, I think if you're a really powerful thrower, the Grace is probably going to turn a little bit too much for your taste. Although, a max weight Orbit Grace would probably be a very suitable choice. So we would certainly recommend trying that if you're looking for another option or wanting to try something different. And the plastic from Latitude 64 feels fantastic. While we didn't talk much about the Zeus, the Emperor, the Force, the D2, Hurricane, and others, depending on the plastic, the weight, and how these discs feel for you, they may be the perfect complement or alternative to a destroyer. So, flight numbers don't matter. What matters is how a disc feels to you. Do you like the feel of the plastic? How does it feel in your hand? Does it make you feel confident when you throw? Does the disc really fly the way that you want it to? So go out there, buy a stack of used discs, borrow some of your friends' discs, go out to an open field and really throw and test these discs to figure out which of the flight numbers actually matter to you. For Six Sided Discs, I'm Greg. Thanks for watching. You can find tons of great destroyer-esque drivers on our website at sixsideddiscs.com or at the link in the description below. If you like this content and want to see more, please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel.